Blog Talk Radio.
He's back.
The irritated genie of Southeast. Every black person should know and understand what they're putting in their minds when they listen to radio, watch television, and go to the movies.
The children of Southampton present Entertainment Fighting the Poltergeist, Saturday, July 10, 2010, featuring the irritated genie of Southeast at the Shanghai City Cultural Center, 3117 Master Street, Philadelphia, PA. Classes start at 12 noon. Class 1, the history of entertainment, what it is and how it works. Class 2 starts at 3 p.m., deciphering plots and themes. Class 3 starts at 6 p.m., The Matrix Made Easy, reading the true messages in what you see. Come on out, black family, to the Shanghai City Cultural Center, 3117 Master Street, Philadelphia, PA, on Saturday, July 10, 2010, to hear Entertainment Fighting the Poltergeist, featuring the irritated genie of Southeast. This is a free event for the entire black family. For more information, contact 888-817-3235. That's 888-817-3235.
Context of White Supremacy. Gus T Renegade in for another program to share constructive information on what racism, white supremacy is, and how it works. This should be a string of very constructive programs. We'll be right back tomorrow. The irritated genie, author of War on the Horizon, he will be our guest tomorrow. Tune in same time, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. Today, have no doubts, should be a very constructive program. Our guest, I'm just grateful that he has been willing to come back. This is his third visit to the cows. I'm just thankful, appreciative that he is willing to share a bit of his time and insight. Like getting a good day on the plantation of white supremacy. He is the author of just brilliant works, including Excuses, of Politics of Interracial Coupling in European Culture, also the author of Homosexuality and the Effeminization of African Males, amongst many other outstanding works, very informative. Please support his website, AquabenHouse.com, the spelling AKOBEN house.com. Again, AquabenHouse.com. If you're listening here at Blog Talk Radio, you can just click his name and it will take you right to the site. A wealth of phenomenal information. A real pleasure to have our guest for today's program, live from Atlanta, Georgia, Dr. Mwalimu K. Baruti. Dr. Baruti, are you with us?
I am with you, Brother Gus, and it's good to be back for, what did you say, the third time?
Third time, sir.
Good. We need to make it more times. Every time I'm on, I really enjoy this because this is just a communal conversation. It's sometimes you get involved in those things that it gets really formal and superficial, but this is just everyday conversation within the community. So I definitely appreciate being on. And having you here because you have yet to ask me a wrong question. so we're doing good. It's good to be back. It's absolutely good to be back. And I wanted to apologize to the audience last time that I was supposed to be on, and to say it in the other way, I completely forgot until it was like an hour and a half, 2 hours after the program began. So it is absolutely not the fault of the host that I wasn't on, that this isn't the fourth time. But it's good that he didn't diss me as a result of that and that I'm back.
Not at all. Again, the pleasure is all ours. Thank you. I know you very busy man running your own school and cranking out books left and right. You got a lot on your plate. We're just thankful you're willing to come in and share some of your insight. And that open invitation, anytime you would like to share information with us, you are always welcome, sir.
I appreciate that. Absolutely. Well, I think we appreciate that. It's like a lot of people don't understand, even though they should. But in this world, it's understandable. I'm maybe the writer in the family, but Enia and I are the discussants. So at least 47% of what's coming out of our mouth has come out of her mouth. So as I say, we appreciate this.
Wow. Today's program, I had told listeners that we were going to discuss two of your works. I wanted to look at the sex imperative and complementarity, but I changed my mind.
Okay.
I think anyone who is familiar with your just brilliant scholarship, it's kind of tough to squeeze two books into one program. So we might have to be a little greedy and see if we can get you to come back and do the sex imperative, because just way too much information to cram it down.
In fact, there's a sister in the area who's doing a program that's dealing with abstinence for our teenage daughters, and it's like every time someone gets their hands on the book, it revives the discussion and the conversation. So that was something that came up earlier today, and yes, I would argue that we would need a whole program to deal with that, especially with questions and answers.
Right on. So, if you're willing to come back and make it visit number 4, that'll be, you already know the book we want to look at for the 4th visit, The Sex Imperative.
Okay.
But I felt it would be correct to discuss complementarity thoughts for Afrikan warrior couples. So many of our discussions here, people talk about the difficulties of maintaining quality relationships amongst black people in a system dominated by racism, white supremacy, and you just have incredible information and suggestions in this book. So I thought it would be great to focus on this book for the duration of the program, and hopefully folks will appreciate what we share.
I hope so too. It's a very important topic, and fundamentally for the reasons that you just indicated. And folks have to realize that in truth and reality, I say to folks all the time now, even though you have to explain it to some degree because you don't want people to leave with the wrong idea, we're in trouble. We're deeply in trouble. And often in that discussion, I don't get a chance to make the point that, because you're outlining what the trouble is, but you often don't get the chance to make the point that the main part of the problem has to do with the relationships that exist between the men and the women in our community. The solution, you could say, is real simple. You could solve that problem, then all the other problems would solve themselves, assuming that the men and the women in the community had a correct mentality relative to what they're supposed to be doing. Of course, solving the problem would require them to have the correct mentality, because you could put all of us together, create couples out of all the men and women who are available, and still end up with a horrible situation because the mentality hasn't changed. So it's not just as some folks might think, a problem of there not being enough people matched together. It's also a problem of many of those who are matched together, as well as those who aren't matched together, not having the right mentality relative to building complementarity, building family, building community, building nation. There is a statement on the back of the book, and I don't have my copy with me in my hand at the moment, but it essentially says that if you don't have couples, you can't have family. If you don't have family, you can't have community. And if you don't have community, you can't have a nation. You can't nation build. And at the starting point, we're having difficulty with the couple part. We're having difficulty bringing serious men and serious women together. And this is a major part of that statement. And we have to be very clear when we're talking about relationships, because desperate times call for desperate measures, if you will. And even though these aren't desperate measures, what kept our ancestor complements together, what was the basis of their relationships, how we were able to work these things out between us before, those would be desperate measures within this culture, within this social environment that we are in right now. So if when we're talking about this, we have to look at it in terms of a smaller picture. One of the things that really trips a lot of us up is that we want to solve this humongous picture. And again, the ancient Kemites, they would tell you that a reed that's been bent very far in the wrong direction, or in the wrong direction, has to be bent even further in the right direction in order for it to be righted. And we have a situation here, not only in this particular society, but globally in the African nation, where relationships between the men and women is horrible right now. I'm trying to think of words that can really describe just how bad it is. When you have a situation like that in an anti-African world, in a world that is trying to keep us apart because they recognize the power of African men and women individually, that's known alone, together, and building a family, that when we get to solving the problems, then we have to look at it in terms of taking like baby steps all over and over again. So we have to look at this in terms of dealing with the problem in small groups instead of trying to solve this at this macro, communal, national level. And there are a number of reasons why I say that, and some of them are outlined in the last book that I wrote called Centered. But the larger the amount of the picture that you look at when you are in dire straits, when you are in really, really, really bad shape, the greater the amount of the problem that you look at, then the more difficult it seems that it'll take to solve the problem, because the problem just gets enormous. It's sort of like some folks who study conspiracy theory, and that's not to say there's nothing to it, but you got a lot of folks who study it, and you're dealing with the idea that there's this group of people, there's this group of men, or this group of families, whatever, who control all the world's money, and who control the direction of history, and who can control what's going to happen in the future, and who control your lives, and who have access to all information, and can see into your very homes, and all the rest of this. So by the time you get finished analyzing this large thing, it seems like winning to any degree is impossible, because you're looking at this as it's like you can't see the trees for the forest. This huge thing that's going on that's, and it does get to a point in the argument that's unstoppable. It's also like the argument that everybody's got to be involved in the revolution in order for it to occur, because you have so many Africans who are anti-African. Then you end up quitting before you begin, because with that recognition, you automatically make the assumption that we can't possibly win any kind of a revolution, be it social, cultural, military, what have you, because there are so many people who are against it. So to me, it's not a warning, but it's a caution to people that when you're talking about building complementarity, when you're talking about building African family, then we have to look in very small circles. We have to look in, if you will, closed circles to begin this work, because a national program, if you will, and I may get in trouble for this, but a national program or international program right now isn't going to work. There are too many factors, and there is also going to be the involvement of people who have Eurocentric notions of what complementarity and family is, who have anti-African ideas embedded in their ideology, who do not understand that we are trying to nation build, who essentially just want to be able to get along with someone else so that they can be better sub-integrated into Western society. And if we're talking about building complements for African people, then those are things that cannot be included in the agenda. Those are things that should not be part of the discussion. But when you're talking about dealing with something at a macro level, then those have to be brought in because everybody's going to be involved, and everybody cannot be involved in this discussion at this point in time.
Unfortunately, I concur. I do have my copy of Complementarity, the phrase from the back of the book, which I think is just, the listeners need to hear it. The couple is the bedrock of the nation. Without it, there is no family, no people. Without couples, there can be no family to procreate and rear confident, untroubled, anchored children. No viable, community-respecting generation can be born to continue the process of life, living, building, and defending. That is from Complementarity, Thoughts for Afrikan Warrior Couples. Could you kind of share with our audience what you mean when you say complementarity?
Well, complementarity is one of the principles of Ma'at, and it is a word a lot of people consider to be a tongue twister, but say it slowly a few times and it'll start coming out much more smoothly than at the beginning. It essentially is, to me, one of the most important principles of Ma'at. It calls for an interactive balance between men and women. It calls for a lot of things. One of the things that it calls for is humility or humbleness. That's something that is the antithesis of the individual person in the West. We're not raised to be humble. We're raised to be arrogant. We're raised to be aggressive. We're raised to believe that we always have to be right. We're raised to seek power over other people. That's the dominant form of socialization in Western society. And, of course, that's not conducive to complementary relationships. When we're talking about complementary relationships, we're talking about being willing to honestly look at yourself and first and foremost see your faults, not as a means of beating up on yourself, but to recognize that there are some things that you are not good at. No one is going to be good at everything. What is the African proverb? No one head holds all wisdom. So there's going to be things that you are not good at. And I keep bringing up Western society because this is where we are. In Western society, people are raised up to not be willing to admit that they're not good at things, at certain things, whatever they may be. So that it's sort of like you back yourself up into a corner and you're constantly fighting because you're trying to do things that you don't do well, that you are constantly tripping over. I remember my mother sent me this plaque type thing when I was in grad school, and it said, half of being smart is knowing what you're dumb at. And this is one of the pillars of complementarity where let's say the man recognizes that he cannot handle money, or the man recognizes that he's not good with directions, or the man recognizes that he's not good with ordering things in the home, or the man recognizes that he's not really a good driver. But within the context of this society, those are not things that he can admit, or that's supposed to do something to his definition of manhood. Complementarity requires that we recognize and, if you will, tally up those things that we are bad at, and we use that list as a measuring rod for the qualities of who we want to build the rest of our life with, because we're looking for someone who can do some, if not all. All is low probability, but still some or most of those things that we cannot do well. We're looking for a match that will enable us to rise together further than we could individually. We're not looking for somebody to rule. We're not looking for somebody to be ruled by. We're looking for someone to walk with. And complementarity, that state of being able to walk with someone requires a level of respect for what the other person brings to the table. and what that other person brings to the table, if it's going to be respected, has to be in many ways things that you're not good at. We admire people who can do what we can't do. We see it in the news all the time. We see it in the sports. We see it in dance. We see it in music. We see it in writing. We see it in people who are good, speakers, public speakers. We admire those qualities in other people that we can't do, and that's a simple equation. There's nothing phenomenal about that. It's worth admiring. It's worth our admiration. But we don't seem to want to bring that home. And if we don't bring that home, then complementarity is not really going to work very well, because respect for the other person requires us respecting or honoring or being in awe of something or some things that they do that we either do not do as well or cannot do at all. Respect comes from a person bringing something to the table that we need. Long-term respect comes from that person bringing something that we need. And sometimes those things are not simply intangible, if you will, like being able to handle money. It can be something or things as simple as us not being very well grounded emotionally, and the other person is grounded emotionally or has the not the training, but intuitively, or just in terms of the gifts that they came with, they have the ability to make emotional situations that we might consider to be unbearable, bearable. I've always, whenever I do the lecture on this, I always talk about how when I was a little boy, my father was in the military, and my mother was a homemaker, but she also worked part-time whenever she needed to for this or that. And when I say a homemaker, my father respected the qualities that she brought to the home, and one of the qualities that she brought to the home was an impatience. She brought an enormous impatience to the home, which didn't allow her to sit and wait for somebody to come and do something for her. When she wanted something done, she wanted it done then. So it was no surprise to come home in the, 5th grade and see her standing there with leather gloves on, a sledgehammer in one hand, goggles on, and half of a wall already torn out between two bedrooms that she wanted to turn into one. That was a normal occurrence, for her. You didn't expect that, and he didn't come home and say, well, you should have taken that part of the wall out first, or you should have swept that up into that pile, or why are you ripping it out that way? He just went into the kitchen, got his food, sat down, started watching TV. We were up there doing the work. He had just come home from work. So that quality in her, he had an enormous amount of respect for. She tended to start things. He tended to take them over at a certain point because she had gone on to another project. And that was an admirable quality. In fact, I really didn't talk about that. What I talk about is how when he would come home and I didn't understand, he would take his check and he would put it in her hand, and I would witness this on a number of occasions. And he would give her his check, and then she would give him every week an allowance. And I'm this little boy in this man's world, in this patriarchy where men are supposed to rule, even though I knew better. It was what I saw in many of the homes around me. I'm wondering, well, how come he isn't putting the money in the bank and giving her an allowance every week to handle whatever business that she has? And then as I grew older, I understood. My father, like I, could not handle money. My mother was able to pay off a home in, 11 years. She bought him a Volkswagen Beetle in 1972 cash. They sold the home that they had and went back to Alabama where they came from and bought a huge plot of land and had a house built on it from scratch because of how she could handle money. I can never remember us not having anything that we needed when we needed. So it's like because he knew that quality, because he understood that quality in her, then he wasn't trying to tell her what to do because he wouldn't know what to tell her. But we have brothers who want to do that. We have sisters who want to do that too. But we have a lot more brothers who do not understand that there's a reason why the markets in our traditions were controlled, run, owned, if you will, operated by the sisters. They don't understand why the goddess of the basket, which was what the seeds were carried in and what the harvest was put in, was a female goddess. And that even though now it has become different with the advent of colonization and all the rest of the nonsense on the planet, for most of the time of African society, women controlled and worked more of the acreage in terms of farming than the men did. That was in virtually every society. This was the women's domain, and that's a word used without it carrying the negative connotations of control and domination. It's like there are for me complementary domains, and they some of them I would argue are naturally in certain people's area of expertise because of the way that they have been socialized, because of the way that they have been trained, because of the way their bodies are built, because of the way they came here, which is natural. That's the way that we were created. So I expect men to be the defensive force within the family. I expect them to be the first line, the perimeter, the first line of defense against anyone who's trying to break into the house. I don't expect him, when he hears a strange noise downstairs, to nudge her and say, go check that out. I expect him to go do that because he has been trained in this way. At least that's the way men are supposed to be trained, but we know that the West is trying to turn our sons into someone else's daughters, so that may be seen as an odd statement in another 10 years or so, if not already in many homes. But that domain that those domains are very important in maintaining and moving a home, a family, a community forward. And those domains have to be complementary. And there's another example of that. And I didn't finish the statement about the finances. In this home, if I get a check from somewhere, not to say that she's not getting checks or she's not getting money, but her money goes into her hands, and my money goes into her hands because I can't handle money, but she can. So I don't ever worry about what I need or what I can get or anything like that. It's always there. If the money was in my hand, we would have that worry. We would have that concern. But I don't have that concern anymore because I've left it in the hands of the most capable person in this house, of the expert in this house when it comes to finances. And I don't have a problem with that because I get everything that I need. So why do I need to tell her what to do with any money? She knows what she's doing. The same thing applies here. And in a number of homes, a great number of homes I've seen within the conscious community, where the man tends to focus on things like our story, tends to focus on things like the building, the contractual stuff, the apprenticeship for boys, and the sisters tend to focus on the spiritual side, the health side, the development of the girls, et cetera, and they don't try to tell each other what to do or to control each other what to do, and it works to build a family. So that respect is necessary for that to happen. It cannot happen without that respect, and that's one of the major things in our individual socialization that we are taught to not have. Respect for another person's skill, respect for another person's ability, an ability to prioritize humility and being humble as a fundamental, basic, essential part of our character development. In a society where everybody's always right, in a society where the focus is on how to get over on people, how to dominate people, in a society where you're measuring who you want to be with based upon what they can do for you versus what you can do for them and they can do for you, well, then you're going to have massive relationship problems. Now, before we go on, it's important for people to understand that we're part of a culture that is not family-oriented. This is a major part of the equation that folks I don't think they recognize a lot. And a lot of times it's because they look at society, they measure what family is supposed to be about and what couples are supposed to be about and what relationships are supposed to be about based upon, if you will, a few hundred years of literature and psychology in European society, their interpretation of what it's supposed to be. And they say that anybody's relationship logic can work because every, society needs couples in order to develop families and all the rest of this. But the cultural factor is a major one. It's a major different one for us. European society is not family-focused. It has never been family-focused. And even if they were to any significant degree, African people are the most family-focused people on this planet. And there are a number of indicators, including the fact that even today, with all the chaos in our families, with all the chaos in our relationships around this planet, we still have more, quote-unquote, extended families than any other race cultural group on this planet, period, today. So there's a cultural difference that views in us a prioritizing of children and a family that is being dismantled within a cultural context that devalues family, that devalues women, that devalues children. You get the reason why you had a feminist movement is because you had women react against their extremely bad treatment by European men. And to bring that construct into the African community without understanding womanism, without understanding the role of African women in our communities historically, without understanding that we're not trying to build European families, that we're not trying to have a situation where women rule the men, which is what's going on with the feminist movement, then we are going to run into all kinds of problems in terms of trying to develop, trying to build complements, and trying to build families. You can't have a priority of children and family in a society that devalues that, extremely devalues that. The history bears that out repeatedly. The treatment of the children, the treatment. You had no African society where you had the development of child labor laws because children were respected. You had no African society where there was such a thing as an orphan because everybody was a part of the family group. And, of course, people say, oh, that was it. No. Why is it that we are now saying what we can't do? It's like sometimes you listen to motivation speakers, and you listen to other folks who are public figures, and they'll say, "Oh, we can do anything. We can do anything that we want to do." But when it comes to being African, when it comes to embracing the tradition of our ancestors, when it comes to nation building African people in a sovereign way, suddenly we can't do that. There's a certain kind of work we can't do because it doesn't fit within the culture that we're trying to be sub-integrated into. So we find excuses as to why we can't do things that we can do. There's nothing about African people that will prevent us from, again, making children the most important thing in our lives, in our community. There's nothing in the African community that would keep, that should be able to keep African women from part or major force, if not the primary force, in our markets, except for these flimsy egos that we have developed, that we can't live without this form of control and domination, which is simply a sorry mirror image of what someone else is very successfully doing. And that's the main reason why their women are rebelling, because they've been controlled and dominated so much. The number of women who were killed in the Inquisition by Europeans in order to bring them back to where they wanted them to be, to put them back into their place, the number of women who were sadistically sexually assaulted and killed during the Inquisition is phenomenal. There is no anything whatsoever, anything even remotely related to that in our story. Nothing like that whatsoever. But we're using this as a model of what we want to be. We're using how they treat their children as a model of what we want to be. And now that they in many ways have been exposed for what they were about, two things have happened. Number one, we have turned our children, or begun the process of turning our children into mirror images of their children, the absolute models of disrespect of adulthood, and we have followed suit in the spoilage of our children, so that they also become these extreme, individualistic, aggressive individuals who think about no one but themselves. We have to think about what the definition of a spoiled child or spoilage is, where the only thing, the only person that you are concerned about is you. You become concerned about other people only to the extent that that can help you to get what you want. But other than that, for the person who is spoiled, that means that the only person who they think about, the only person who is important, is that individual. Under that context, it's understandable why our divorce rates, which have always been higher within Western society than the Europeans' divorce rates, of course, the racism factor is the most important contributing one there, why the divorce rates are going to get even higher now. Because how are you going to make a life with someone who isn't going to always be about pleasing you, who isn't always going to see things the way that you see them and you think that you are the authority? When we look at where we are going, which is a critical piece in terms of defining or deciding what it is that these small groups of complements need to look at, when we're going, we have to look at the direction simply that something like marriage is going in the West. The Western ideal would be a sexual free-for-all, where you're with whoever you want to be, whenever you want to be with, and the everything would be fine. It's just a game, play. If you follow that to its logical end, we've been following, we see marriage. Of course, some people argue because the promotion of babies in the media, but people with sense know that that is simply a reaction to the zero and negative population growth of Europeans, and then believing that they have to have babies in order for civilization to continue to exist, and we have to have less babies. But the direction that marriage is taking itself, you've gone from these long-term relationships in the West and in the white community essentially meant female domination. So in that household, he was in charge. He could beat you. He could do whatever he wanted to you. You were the one who were always guilty if a rape occurred. You were the one who always had to do what you were told. You were only allowed to work. Okay? It wasn't a matter of that being something that you normally naturally did. That was something that you were allowed to do. And, of course, I would ask folks to read Foucault's The Congo Art of Babysitting when they want to get a bird's-eye view of the role of African women as an independent worker throughout our story. But we move from these long-term, if you will, forced, these long-term horrible relationships where the going story in the 70s was the number of white women who were getting divorced and saying that they had only stayed together long enough for the children to get out of the home. And it was a horrible situation for them to be in. Not that I'm really concerned about how they felt, but we're talking about a trend here. From there, we've gone to these enormous divorce rates. We've gone to this situation where marriage in itself is seen as something of an anomaly. To find somebody who's married for 9 or 10 years is odd in this day and age. For 9 years or so, the fewer that you find. They have this thing now where you sign a contract for marriage, and you do get married. They're called trial marriages. Now you're going to have, to me, that's mind-boggling, the idea, because marriage is supposed to be the sacred thing, and you're swearing to the universe to love and protect and honor and hold and all the rest of this through sickness and health and all the rest of this. So you just made a lie to the universe. Somebody did, somewhere. But they have these trial marriages where you get married for a year, and at the end of that year, you reassess. And if that was not to your liking, or if it didn't work out the way that you wanted it to, then it's immediately annulled. This is becoming more and more common. Folks need to watch the trends. This is becoming more and more common. The idea that marriage is supposed to be a major disciplining component for the men and for the women has somehow slipped out of the equation. Marriage is supposed to be a maturing element. It's not supposed to be moving you or maintaining you in this unchanging state of childishness. It's supposed to be maturing you. And one of the main ways that it does mature you is that it forces you to even more so. You're supposed, of course, do it more and more as you get older, in terms of childhood and teenager and young adult and all the rest of that. But marriage is supposed to continue you moving in the process where you sacrifice for others, where you learn to put aside your wants for other people because they're more important than you are. That's a disciplining process. So the process of spoiling our children, of following suit for them, which the spoilers thing is a whole nother issue and problem. I keep bringing it up because folks, I don't think they realize how damaging this is to the minds of people. The spoilage process does not allow people to mature. So the marriages naturally aren't going to work because you end up having two children who are thinking essentially of nothing but themselves, and the glee of the emotional letting of being, quote-unquote, in love, it doesn't last. It doesn't hold it together. Our ancestors were wise enough to recognize, and we find this everywhere in our traditions, that love is something that comes into existence. It unfolds. It isn't something that you fall into. You don't fall into love. It's something that unfolds. It grows as you get to know this person who you are dealing with, who you are living with, who you are building with. It would say that you realize or are in love when you have reached the point, or you know love exists, when you have reached the point where you know that this person will die for you. That takes a long time. A number of spiritualists from the continent have made the analogy of marriage as climbing a mountain. Two people climbing a mountain. It's a very, very difficult process. And anybody who's listening to this who is married and has been married for a while knows that it is an extremely difficult process. But it is a process that we have to work at if we're going to build. If we can't tolerate the difficulties of having to relate and grow with another person who we have selected to be with us for the rest of our lives, then how are we going to run our homes or run our nations? I heard Clark said on one occasion, he also wrote this down, that running a family is practicing a nation. We can't run our relationships. And I'm talking about two people running. I'm not talking about one person bearing down on everybody. I'm talking about two people running a relationship. We can't run our relationships, so maybe it's no wonder that we can't run our communities and can't run our nation, because we're not getting the practice in where we need to get the practice in, and that is in complementary relationships. And, of course, our children see that we can't handle this, so we can understand, or we should be able to understand, what is coming in terms of their being willing to sacrifice any of their time and energy into a relationship with one other individual when they can get whatever they want to from wherever, which is the European model. There was a very interesting study that came out, it was about a year ago now. It was here in Atlanta, and they were interviewing a number of middle school students, male and female, black. All of them were African. And they were trying to find out their desire for children and family and marriage, and just sort of a simple survey poll, and there was some interesting findings. One of them was that that all of them wanted to have children. That was of course nice to hear, but all of them want to have children, and that of course is another part within the Western society of spoilage and individualism and the drive to make us commit self-genocide, is the inculcation of children a lack of desire to have any children whatsoever. But they wanted all of the people, all of the survey wanted to have children. None of them wanted to get married, and we see that in so many of the students that we run into contact with in the public and private school systems here in Atlanta. They don't want to get married, so they begin to inquire as to why. And one of the reasons, which to me is so logical in terms of children do what they see, was that all of the children in the survey answered the question in the same way, responded in the same way. None of them knew in their immediate community, none of them knew of any married couples. None of them knew of any married couples whatsoever. None of them were acquainted. None of them could name anyone in their neighborhood who was married. So the idea of getting married to them has become an alien phenomenon. It has become something that is old school or old hat, or for folks who just don't get it. Why would you want to be tied down? Why would you want to be constrained? Why would you want to be limited? Which is that Western idea that has been pushed on us, the idea of always having to experience something new, something different, always having to change up constantly. That is a mentality that they have pushed on us, and it is working against us in a major way in terms of the creation of anything seriously complementary over a period of time, as well as the idea of marriage or family. The idea of having children was fine, but the idea of having children was in no way, shape, form, or fashion thought of within the context of family. It was not in no way, shape, form, or fashion thought of in the context of a complementary relationship, or the development of a family over time with a male and a female, or a man and a woman, rearing these children. And I would suggest that if this survey had delved a little deeper, you would have found that the conception of family was only had to do with the woman and her children, or the girl and her children, in terms of how people visualize it now, even though we know that the brother may or may not be there for reasons of his own or reasons from her. We're not going to get into that right now. I don't think that that's really, in a way, anything that needs to be discussed before the genocidal attempt of Western society against African people is really explained, because that would, in many ways, preclude having even to discuss who's present in the home where you have a child, whether he's present or he's not present, or she's present or she's not present, because we forget, 5 to 6% of all single homes with children are male-headed. So there are a lot of brothers who are doing this by themselves too. So it is a culture that produces a certain type of mentality that has to be discussed first, and that's, of course, something that people don't want to talk about. They want to act like this is just society. This is just anybody's society. Western society is no different than any other society. And so we're making a big deal out of explaining how it's different than African society, because society is just society. No, society is not just society. There are different values in different societies. There are different priorities in different societies. There are different emphases on different aspects of character in different societies. There's a different interpretation of what education means in different societies. So we are not just in human society, if you will, if we want to define this as human, because human is defined differently in different societies. In traditional African society, you weren't born a human being. You were born a person, but you weren't born a human being. Being human was a quality or set of qualities that you had to demonstrate progressively in your lifetime in order to be defined as a human being. It was the way that you were. In European society, anybody can be a human being. A serial killer is a human being. A rapist is a human being. A licker is a human being. Okay, so there is a major difference in terms of just basic definitions between societies. In the West, a family is primarily defined as a nuclear form. That's not the way it's primarily defined in African society. Okay, marriage is something that occurs between families. It's just you have these two primary individuals and these two primary individuals who get together and they have a particular responsibility within it. That doesn't take anything away from them as a complementary couple. It's just that the focus is on family, not on me and you against the world. So we have to, when we talk about the concept of complementarity, we have to talk about it within the African cultural context and not just within the context of me finding a man or me finding a woman. We have to talk about it in terms of in the context of having a vision that is so much greater than that man and that woman. Because if you don't have that vision, if you don't have an idea of what you're supposed to be about the business of doing in this life that is larger than the two of you and that involves the empowerment, the liberation, the sovereignty of African people, then you're just dabbling with individualism. You're just playing around because there's no social context where the institutions that are created do not serve the interests of that society, of that culture. There's no such thing in European society. Those individuals who are the movers and shakers in the community, the movers and shakers at the national level, they are together, but their priority is about the maintenance, the extension of Western society. That's the priority, not just them having somebody to be with. The priority is political. Complementarity must be understood within a political context. It doesn't take anything away from the relationship. It doesn't take any of the fun away. It doesn't take away any of the appreciation. It doesn't take away any of the trips. It doesn't take away any of the experiences with the children. And in fact, as far as I'm concerned, it makes them better because you have a larger vision that you are trying to work with, and that vision is connected to so many other people who are trying to do the same thing, who are trying to nation build, and are trying to nation build African people. So complementarity must be defined, must be understood within the context of being African. If it's not understood within the context of being African, then it's a meaningless concept. It's a Eurocentric concept, really, because that is the model that quote-unquote complementarity, and it loses its meaning because that's not what you're looking for. Complementarity is not what you're looking for in the West. You're looking for someone who gives you a shoulder to cry on every once in a while, somebody who you can spend money with, someone who you can hang out with, someone who you can sooner than later leave and find somebody else to play with who's new and fresh. So the definition of complementarity in Western culture is not complementarity, because complementarity means that you're trying to find somebody who you're going to be working with. And of course, if nothing else, and this is something else that's not taught to our children, fall in love mentality, our children are not taught to assess the qualities of whoever it is they're looking for. That's something that we do here in our institution on, at least an annual basis, and it's somehow the subject is probably going to come up, and the children are asked to write a list of those qualities that they want, if they're female, want in a man, and if they're male, what they want in a woman. And then we look at this list, and they're rank ordered. We have to put them in rank order in terms of what is most important. Most children are not taught in those terms. If anything, there are 2 or 3 simple terms. Number one, looks, whatever that may be, because as I say to the young folks here, you marry somebody for their looks, and then 1 week after you get married, they're in a horrendous automobile accident that disfigures them. There goes the relationship, because you're in the relationship with them because of their looks. Second, and sometimes even first, is money, material resources in the West. And the third is of course, you got the fame and fortune. The third is going to be their potential to be somebody, which to me, again, is mind-boggling, because you come here somebody. But the West, because it takes away your African identity, takes away your identity as a human being, and only offers you certain routes, certain materialistic routes to being someone, then you have to look at the person based upon their ability to be somebody, or to become somebody even more famous or more known or more loved by so many people. So the definition of complementarity, if we're going to deal with this seriously, has to come out of an African cultural context.
Again, a privilege, I guess, for today's program, Dr. Mwalimu K, Baruti, author of Complementarity, Thoughts for Afrikan Warrior Couples. You have touched on consistently the concept that these relationships, number one, take place within the context of a global system of racism, white supremacy, and I thought one of the really important aspects that you touched on in the book, having a mission statement. Can you talk about the mission statement that you suggest for Black African couples and how that relates to replacing white supremacy with justice?
I am so glad that you asked that. I think that that's the first time that anyone has asked about the mission statement relative to complementarity. Not that people didn't think about it, but the first time on the air. And I think it's a very important thing, because it's like a prayer or a libation, meditation, affirmations. These are things that we need to say to ourselves and, if possible, to each other on a daily basis, because this affirms what we're supposed to be about. And we say our I just thought about that. We say our prayers every day. You know, we do, for some of us, we do our libation every day. But we don't, many of us, don't talk about what we're supposed to be as a family, as a set of complements. And when I say complements, I use those terms interchangeably, because that's supposed to be the basis. That's why you're developing complementary relationships, because you're trying to build family. We have a family mission statement. There's a school mission statement here, which is a collection of affirmations so the students know what they're supposed to be about. Interestingly, there are differences, but the politics is the same. So I have my own individual mission statement. EDI has their own individual mission statement. We have a joint family mission statement. And if you don't mind, I'd like to just read the 11 points on our mission statement real quick.
Please, sir.
Okay. It begins like this. As an African family in the Western cultural wasteland, we recognize and accept the responsibilities of re-Africanization. The Creator, Spirit, the ancestors, and elders have called us to find our path toward the African way. In fulfilling this mission, we pledge to pursue the following necessary African absolutes. 1, we will remove all contradictions between what we think and speak as Africans and what we do as Africans. Number 2, we will unconditionally love and support each other. Number 3, we will every day and in all ways elevate and emphasize the spiritual and intellectual over the material. Number 4, we will rear our children in the African way without compromise. Number 5, we will work toward cultural and social, including economic, educational, and military independence. We will master the skills required for self-sufficiency. 7, we will work to mentally and physically liberate African people. 8, we will acknowledge our ancestors and live by their wisdom. Number 9, we will protect all African children, remembering it takes a whole African village to rear our children. 10, we will embrace our heritage by reclaiming an African name, language, and spiritual system. 11, and as warrior scholars, we will never forget who our enemies are, regardless of color. And all of these, I mean, it's like there's so many different aspects of, or important points in each one. There is a problem in the West that is associated with an inability to tell the truth. Lying, just like cursing, has become so common. The person who lies is the person who is able to manipulate other people, which in the Western mind gives them an advantage over that individual. I beat you. I won. That competition where it's always dog eat dog. I've got to be on top, and if I'm not on top, then I'm nothing. That lying mentality moves us away from our spirit. There's a quote from a brother who, well, it's not important who it was. He made the point that in our traditions, lying is considered to be a moral leprosy. It is a tearing of the person away from the spirit. It's a tearing of the spirit. And it says in most African people, among most African ethnic groups, it is traditionally you would prefer to die, to kill yourself, than to have to live with a lie. We walk around now, even folks who walk around with huge crosses and talking about Jesus and got a Bible and all the rest of this, who are busy lying to themselves, to other people, as if somehow the Creator that they're praying to on a daily basis misses that, doesn't see that, doesn't hear that. They can get away with that. If the Creator is omnipotent and omnipresent and omnipresent, omnipotent, and all-knowing, all-seeing, I'll remember in a minute, of course. Then he, she, it, however you want to label the Creator, isn't going to miss that. Is going to see that. But in this cultural context, lying is so very important for your sanity, for your ability to be able to get over. In our traditions, you were not supposed to have a contradiction between what you said, what you thought, and what you did. And as African people, that is the direction that we're supposed to be moving in, moving toward being our ancestors. If they are, then obviously we don't know who we are, because we are from them. We are them. And, of course, I'm not including ancestors who raped their way into our bloodlines, because those aren't ancestors. We need to define ancestors in a very, very specific way. No people I know includes people who committed treason against them as their ancestors. No one who I know of, no people who I know of considers, will sit up and set up shrines or call out the names of ancestors who were murderers, who were rapists, who were the most evil people here and there. They don't do that. So we have to be also equally selective in who we consider to be our ancestors, in the same way we have to be that way when we're dealing with who is and is not to be considered an elder. Words in here like unconditionally, that means without question, without there being no qualification there. You lose your job, times get hard, somebody ends up in the hospital. It doesn't change. It doesn't change it at all. And of course, Europeans understand this as politics. So we see this in the imagery in the media. And of course, to me, that's twofold. Number one, they're trying to teach their own how they should act, how they should behave, which is strange in that that's something that should not have to be taught. You have to teach somebody. You have to teach somebody how to be concerned about other people. You have to teach somebody how to become emotionally involved in a situation. That shouldn't be something that you have to. Another time, people or trying to make people believe this is the way that you really are, that you really are emotionally involved with other people, that you really are in love, that you really should be qualified to be a member of the human race when all that you have done and all that you are about indicates otherwise. It's amazing to me the number of people who extrapolate, who infer from 1 or 2 or 3 Europeans who they consider to be good to the entire European people, including all of their history. I say we will rear our children in the African way without compromise. Marie Evans, a sister major poet, who wrote a poem called Speak the Truth to the People. And folks need to know that poem. That should be hanging somewhere in their house. So I'm very sure if they Google Marie Evans, Speak the Truth to the People, that they find that poem and they see exactly what I'm talking about. She distinguished between raising our children and rearing our children. Raising our children means that we give them the food that they need, clothes, we give them shelter, we take them to the Saturday soccer practice, we make sure that they are at school when they're supposed to be at school, we take them to the hospital when they need medical care, et cetera, or to a holistic doctor, as it should be the case. That's raising. Rearing, you do all that also, but you also teach the child about their power and the responsibility of that power to their people. It's a political education. That's a political socialization. You don't leave the politics to someone else. Carter G. Woodson made the point, obviously, years ago, that it's fools who allow their children to be educated by the enemy. That makes absolutely no sense to me. I can't understand that, and I especially can't understand people they come whining or complaining to us about how bad a school system is treating their child, and they've recognized this for years, and yet the child is still there. That doesn't make any sense to me. That's your primary responsibility, your child. So how could you allow your child to be taught wrong? How could you allow your child, knowingly allow your child, and make excuses for allowing your child to continue to be mis- and diseducated by people and a system that hates their very existence? That makes no sense to me as parents. We will work toward independence. That's in all realms, and this is that umbrella that I'm talking about when I'm talking about relationships having a higher calling, having a higher vision than just those two individuals. So virtually none of these talk about the selfish thing between two people. It talks about what these people are supposed to do in terms of being responsible to their immediate family and their extended family, which is the community. We will master the skills required for self-sufficiency. How are you going to become independent if you don't acquire the skills? And if you're going to set up yourself as a model of African nation building, if you set yourself up as a model of a complementary couple that's supposedly about the process of nation building, then you should be acquiring skills that will allow a nation to survive. Not just skills from books, not just, let's say, in the case here, being able to teach and being able to write and all of those things. There also needs to be a garden. There also needs to be some delving into some area like carpentry or brick masonry or plumbing or electrical work or auto mechanics or small engine mechanics or something. There ought to be somebody involved in sewing. You do need clothes, shoemaking, being able to get and distribute energy. All of these are skills that have to be acquired. And as a complementary couple, as a family unit, as a community, we need to be acquiring these things, or we need to stop talking about being independent. There's a quote today that, and I've end up focusing so much more and more on people talking who aren't doing anything. We have a lot of talkers who aren't doing anything. I'm still upset with so many folks in the 70s who were talking all this talk about revolution and nation building and all the rest, and they have built nothing. They have left us no schools. They have run no schools. They have created no farms. But they were constantly talking about independence. They were constantly talking about us being able to do things to do for self. but they're not actually doing anything. The proverb is an African proverb, and I got it off of a sister's page on Facebook, and it said that I believe the chattering bird does not build a nest. We have a lot of chatterers, but we don't have a lot of nest builders. We need nest builders. And interestingly, when you have a complementary pair, they tend to be better nest builders. They tend to get more done. They tend to be able to assist each other out, and when you get assistance, you can get more done. Okay? We will acknowledge our ancestors and live by their wisdom. Live by their wisdom. These thousands of generations of Africans who came before us, who have acquired an understanding of the universe and how it works, how Sasaya, how Mother Earth operates, principles of physics, all of the other things that are needed for human beings to think and to know. Why are we following the anti-African wisdom of aliens, of people who want to see us removed from planet Earth? Why would we do that? Why would we dismiss our ancestors, i.e. who we are, and take up the mantle of people who have done everything in their power to destroy our ancestors, stole from them what fit into their warped sense of reality, and then follow that as if that is the only or the best way for us to be human, because we are too afraid to do what we need to do to change this world into what it needs to be. No one else can be blamed. We can't get upset. We can't point fingers at them if we're not doing what we need to do, if we're not correcting this. If I know that something is wrong in my home and I don't do anything about it, then the fault is as much, if not more, mine than whoever it was that created the problem in the home. So we are responsible for correcting this. If we are who we say we are, if we're all these kings and queens and we came from all of this and we're all this powerful people and all the rest of this, then why aren't we at least organizing at the spiritual and mental level to correct this? And I'm not talking about organizing at the spiritual level where we're all human and we don't have to worry about doing any battle and we don't have to worry about doing any building, that something's going to come along and save us and take care of all the rest of this, and all we have to do is sit down and walk around and tell everybody peace. It doesn't work like that. That's what we talk about when we talk about rhetorical ethic, where Europeans have us thinking that they are something different than what they are. And as we continue to talk all this peace and all the rest of this nonsense, they continue to commit genocide against us and to turn this world into the thing that they need it to be for them to be comfortable with themselves, and to turn everybody into beings that reflect them so they can become normal. We will protect all African children, remembering that it takes a whole African village to rear the children. It takes a whole African village. That was a question that came up here earlier this year, at a preparedness conference, which was so appropriate, because we always talk about it takes a village to raise the children. We need whole villages to raise our children. A bunch of people is not a whole village. Even if they live in the same community, even if they live in the same neighborhood, isn't necessarily a whole people. A whole people requires that they know who they are, that they have character. Wade Nobles, in a collection of speeches that he made, he talked about character. And he said that if you are not passing on who you are to your people in its entirety, uncompromised, then you have no character. He didn't say that you can move toward that, or that this is just a bad sign, or there's something that you need to move. And I'm trying to find this quote right now. He says, you have no character. And I think that's critical when you're talking about us having whole villages, whole people that is supposed to be about the business. And here's the quote, if I may read this. And this is out of his Seeking the Saku collection of speeches and essays. He says, character is something very precise, yet we struggle with the preliminary definition of the word. I argue that character is the preliminary mark of a people, which signifies their distinctive qualities. All that is still very general because we don't know what distinction means and we don't know what quality means. One's character is the complexity of mental and spiritual traits which mark a people and is a detectable expression as evidence of their ability to transmit their own hereditary information. I want to read that sentence again because this is very important. One's character is the complexity of mental and spiritual traits which mark a people and is a detectable expression as evidence of their ability to transmit their own hereditary information. If we're not passing to the next generation of African children the essence of what it is to be African, we have no character. The fundamental evidence of our having character is that we pass in very precise ways what it means to be normal. And for African people, being normal is not being European. For African people, being normal is being African. And we're trying to pretend that being normal is being European. We're trying to pretend that the reason that we are having problems with our relationships is because there's something wrong with us personally instead of us following a anti-African, corruptive, individualistic, materialistic model of quote-unquote relationships. So essentially what he has said, and if we look at this carefully, he's telling us without insulting us in terms of giving us a vision as to where we need to go, that we have no character right now. Because if we had character, then we wouldn't be in the situation that we're in. And in order for us to develop that character, everybody's not going to get it at first. Some folks have to sit down and decide that they are going to be complements. And they have to sit down and write individual and a joint family mission statement. And they have to write that like that is their blood oath to their ancestors, to their children, to those yet to come, to the Creator, to Spirit, to their elders, to the other couples who are attempting, to the other complements who are attempting to move in that direction. And then they have to do the work, because it's work. It doesn't mean that play isn't involved, but it's work. And it's a lot of work. When you're in trouble, when you're behind in the race, when you've lost your way, you don't sit there and play. You get busy. You get to work. And because of the individualistic and the spoilage mentality in the West, even though some of us recognize just how deeply in trouble we are, we still just want to play because work is hard. The things you have to start from scratch that Europeans have already put in place for us in their special way, with their special ideology deeply embedded in it, but it'll allow us not to have to work so hard to develop things from our ancestral scratch. And if we don't do that, then this conversation will still be being held in another 50, 60, 70, 100 years if we still remember that we're African. Is that even part of the discussion anymore? So the number 10, of course, we will embrace our heritage by reclaiming an African name, language, and spiritual system. Those things take time. And they should take. Things tend to take time. And it takes quite a while to acquire an African language, but that's not an excuse not to try to acquire it, not to work at it. Some people have already acquired bits and pieces and don't even know it when they're reading certain books. Complementarity would be an African concept. It's not just the words that are important, it's the reconceptualization that goes with that, the taking of those words, those terms, and defining them in such a way that they benefit our efforts, that they benefit the empowerment, liberation, and sovereignty of African people. So just learning an African language in and of itself is not what we're trying to do. We're trying to get the essence of it. We're trying to get the spirit of it. We're trying to operate on that. As someone said a number of years ago, when you ingest or you operate within someone else's language, then you ingest and operate within their spirit. So you are acting as them. Your spirit becomes their spirit. Or should I say their spirit becomes your spirit, or their spiritlessness becomes your spiritlessness. And the last one on here, which I think is critical, and none of these is in any particular order, we have to know who our enemies are. We have to never forget who our enemies are. Most enemies who we're dealing with now are relying on us having forgotten that they are our enemies, that they have been and are now and will continue to try to remove us from planet Earth in terms of a knowing, in terms of a conscious, in terms of an existing people. That's what genocide is about, killing off of the genetic composition of a people, removing them as an existing or from existence in the universe. That's the attempt. And, of course, we get this logic from some folks who really, really, really don't get it, that, well, it's all spirit, it's all matter, so even if, they kill you, what have you, you still don't cease to exist. Well, this is the battleground right here. This is the battleground. To me, those individuals are running away from the responsibility of defending their children. They're running away from the responsibility of confronting our enemies. They are allowing our enemies kill us and rationalizing that as being irrelevant because in some afterlife or what have you, everything is going to be fine and everything will be straight. And it's amazing to me that spiritualists have the same, even though it's couched in quote-unquote traditional terms, in many cases have the same logic of folks who are saying heaven is awaiting us or some great rapture is awaiting us. We have work to do now, so we watch our children be destroyed so that we can individually be saved. Because if we do anything, then it may jeopardize our chances of getting into heaven or whatever place it is that we're supposed to be going to. So we have to know who our enemies are. We have to act accordingly. We have to be smart. The children are the priority in our traditions. Complementarity is the situation within which children are brought into existence, in which spirit returns through them. That's supposed to be the basis of the complementary relationships. Family. African people are children-centered. African people are family-centered. African people are not individualistic-centered, even though has been brought to our attention on a number of cases, a number of ways. African people, unlike the logic that you get in the West relative to that, African people promoted the idea of individualism. They didn't promote the idea of extreme individualism, which is promoted in the West, but they promoted the idea of individualism. They knew that everybody came with their own special talents, their own special drives. They recognized that. And they recognized that in order for their community, their nation to be the best that it could be, that these talents, that these abilities had to be honed to the best of their ability, because that honing of the individual improved the quality of the entire community. That's individualism. But that's individualism in African terms. That's not the way it's taught in the West, even though it ends up doing the same thing because it ends up benefiting the European nation. Us being individuals ends up being benefiting the European nation is nothing other than it allows them to benefit materially from our consumption, from our conspicuous consumption. So that individualism does benefit, our individualism here does benefit European nations. Our extreme individualism does benefit the European nation, but not in the same way that it was expected to benefit the African nation when we acted and thought and spoke as African people. So the concept, complementarity, it has to be couched in political terms. It is a political term. Everything that we say is political. But complementarity, the way that we say things, the terms that we use, they have to be defined politically, or they are useless. They don't help us in any way. They work against us. And when we're not doing things to assist us in our movement toward liberation, empowerment, sovereignty, when we're not doing things to move us in that particular direction, even when we're just not doing anything, it is absolutely working against us. And we think that because we're not doing anything, or we're not making a whole lot of noise about something, or we're not raising sand about something, that it somehow is not hurting us. But when you have it's the same argument that I get. I've had someone say to me, well, you talk about the black folks and how this helps and blah, blah, blah. Why don't you have some balance in there, talk about white folks? Well, I have a whole society, a whole world that's talking about white folks, that's talking about Europeans, that's talking about their quote-unquote goodness and what benefits them. So if I'm talking about African people and I talk about European people too in some way that benefits them, then I'm adding to the statement to benefit Europeans. And I'm taking away from that to benefit Africans because of all that's already out there about Europeans and all that continues to be said about Europeans. It's amazing to me where everything out here is being said to the benefit of Europeans almost, and then when you try to say something about African people or what we need to do, then someone comes along to say, well, what about the Europeans? What do they got to do with our nation building, except to the extent that they are trying to stop it with every amount of energy that they can, and that, of course, in and of itself should tell us something. Why is it so important for African men and women not to be together within the European cultural context? Why is it so important within the European cultural context for children to be separated from their parents? Why is it so important in the European cultural context for African children to be taught things in the schools which are lies about themselves and their ancestors, even if the lies if they're lies of omission? Why is it so important for African people to have such horrible diets that their complementary relationships don't last long enough for them to develop the things that they should be developing as complementary couples, as a people? And all of these questions are, well, if I want to talk about Europeans, I guess those would be the things that I would want to talk about relative to us, because this is not accidental. These things are intentional, and they are working against us as a people. And all of these things affect complementary relationships.
Wow. That I felt like that was an integral aspect of this particular book, Complementarity. In fact, on page 68, you said the systematic assault against the African family continues. There is ample evidence that the destruction of the African family remains a foremost conscious priority of European people. And I think your mission statement is the counter to that effort on the part of white people. We had a bunch of folks that called in. Is it acceptable if we get a few questions from folks?
Why not?
Okay. Let's see. A person called in with a blocked number. If you have a question for Dr. Baruti, your line is open. Go right ahead.
You're on the show.
You can be heard. Person that called with a block number.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Loud and clear.
Hi. I was saying thank you to Dr. Baruti for being on the show. I don't have any questions at this time, but I really enjoyed discussions on this topic, and listening to you, it just made me realize what a great job my grandparents did, and even after my grandmother was gone, leaving behind the model that they left. So I definitely appreciate what you're talking about today.
Well, thank you very much. And if we can, I don't know, you don't find a lot of people talk about their grandparents, but those who do, especially in the discussions with me, they talk about the values, the truth, the resilience, the power that they passed on without having to be hard or mean or ugly. They just were acting as Africans. And that's something that definitely has to be valued, and we can't forget that. A lot of people forget about their grandparents and their great-grandparents. Without them, we kind of wouldn't be here. I appreciate that.
That's 818. Thank you for the call and the question. Thank you for supporting the program. I want to read that quote again because that just really stuck out. I highlighted that as I read. The systematic assault against the African family continues. There is ample evidence that the destruction of the African family remains a foremost conscious priority of European people. Person who called in, this is Mr. Nero. Mr. Nero, if you have a question for Dr. Baruti, your line is open, sir.
Hotel. Have you heard? Have you heard?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Okay. I will be brief because I'm not in a quiet zone. I have a question, and it may actually ruffle some feathers, and I wrestle with whether or not I should ask this question publicly. But I feel that our situation is so dire that we should be considering arranged marriages for our offspring. Do you feel that that's incorrect or correct?
According to our traditions, and we have to be careful with that word arrange within the Western context, which is probably the reason why, that's part of the reason why the feathers would be ruffled. And we have to understand when we're talking about marriages that were brought together or designed by parents or elders in the community, that they measured the families of the couple. They measured the families of the two individuals who they thought would make an excellent complementary pair. And also within our traditions, and I find this repeatedly, and I have not found anywhere where this is not a choice, the child or the adult or the young adult had the option of saying no. Had the option of saying, no, I don't want the person. It wasn't, the West wants to give the idea that African society was so anti-individualistic, which is what they are promoting so hard. Wants to give the idea that people in these societies had no choice, had no mind of their own. They thought like the Borg on Star Trek, that there was no individual thinking whatsoever, that everything was planned for them. There was no ingenuity, no new thoughts, no new thinking, no analysis. You just did the way that it had always been done without thinking whatsoever. And that is a complete and total absolute lie. I would argue that even though I would agree with that, and I would agree in many situations, that would be something that would be necessary. You have to understand that in the context of a community. You have to understand that in the context of a community that itself is wholly involved in this, is going to be around, is going to support this, is going to be a model for this, is going to have a protective, if you will, sacred area, which they are part of, which allows for this to occur. And that you have also young folks who were brought up with an understanding of what that is about. The same thing applies to polygamy. It has to be brought up within a particular cultural context, or that cultural context has to be created. In that context, there's no reason why that couldn't occur. There's no reason why that wouldn't make sense, because you could, if you're not talking about I need to fall in love, then you would have people who were making decisions who should know better about the qualities of the individuals involved than anybody else. I was talking about Foucault's discussion of the Congo water babysitting earlier for a second, and one of the things in that particular book where he talks about the elders as being the babysitters, if you will, and please read the book, because babysitter, that word used in the West, is all flawed when it comes to the discussion of this book. The elders were the ones who were watching out or watching over the young folk, because there was no one else better qualified to teach these children. Not only was it because they had, in many cases, infirmities, they could not maybe go out in the field all the time. They needed somebody older to do this while the younger folks went out and attended to the hunting, and tended to the agriculture, and tended to the markets. But more than anything else, no one in the community knew the values and the character and how to instill this and how to rear their children than the elders. Who better qualified to do this? So in terms of choosing who should be with who, And then there's nobody better qualified to do that than the people who have been through the process and know everybody in the district and know the families in the district and what they're about and what would make the best match in the community. This idea of soulmate, and Iniya, she straightened it out for me a long time ago in terms of there not being only one soulmate, and if soul is a part of what have you, then everybody's going to have a piece, or you should be able to find more than one soulmate in life. Or if you get married and then your quote-unquote soulmate is in an auto accident the next day, then you never will find anybody to ever be your complement because you only have one soulmate. That's Western malarkey, and it is malarkey that has kicked in now with all of this interest in me finding love, which has been a phenomenon, a problem in the West ever since their beginning, because they have misdefined the concept of love. That idea would work against, or people would use that idea, that as something to work against the idea of people having other people selected for them in a relationship. With all the divorces that goes on, somebody might make the logical argument that maybe that's part of the problem, where people, because they don't have the intelligence, we say that the ignorance of youth, and that's not an insult. When I was young, I was pretty ignorant too, just like every other youth was ignorant when they were young, because they didn't know the world, they didn't have wisdom, they barely had knowledge. All they had was information. That's all I had when I was young, and a little bit of knowledge to match, and a few sayings from mom and a few sayings from dad. So you're operating out of an emotional thrust, or you're operating out of your hormones, which has become the excuse for everything, or you're operating out of some social definition of what is or is not beauty, and something physically is happening and you have no idea what it is, and you're equating it with this because you've been taught that that's what it's supposed to reflect. So if that's what's guiding your choices in terms of who you're supposed to be with, then that's not a very intelligent decision. And I've seen a lot of people who have, in the conscious community, who, when they turned 50 or 60 or 40 in some cases, ended up, and 30 in some cases, ended up in divorce because who they were with was not who they thought they were with. So it would seem that people who know would be in a better position to make that choice, to make that decision, or to assist in the process of making that decision. Maybe that's the road to getting there, where young folks who are considering becoming complements sit down with some elders who should know something, and through a series of discussions, figure out if this person or these people would really make a good couple, and have that discussion with them. And then they can decide. And as time moves on, maybe it becomes even a more formal process, making that decision.
Person who called in, last four digits 7908. 7908. If you have a question for Dr. Baruti, your line is open.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Baruti, for coming on the show. It's almost mind-boggling when I think about it, with the black family and the options for our children. Now, I have two kids, a boy and a girl, and my son is about maybe 10 years away from really dealing with a relationship. My daughter is, 20-something years away.
Okay.
I have elected, and I'm planning, because I'm looking at the situation right now and how dire it is, and I have elected to teach my children about polygamy.
Okay.
My daughter, in particular, and my son as well. So I encourage him, or I am encouraging him, that don't become a player. Mm-hmm. If you feel that that's something that you're requested to do, then maybe you need to grapple with the fact that you are, a brother who is able to share his love. My daughter, because I don't want her to marry outside the race, nor become homosexual.
Absolutely not.
Because we have several friends and family who have went on college campuses, and their daughters have, turned homosexual because there were no, available boys, and they have this idea that they're going to go off to college and find their mates. How do we teach that without, if you can answer the question, without destroying in this European culture the idea of family? And because I'm looking, that's not something that I practice, but I realize that this may be necessary for my children, as our population is further destroyed.
Yeah.
How do we do that? How do we do that and not compromise the idea of family? If that question makes sense.
That's a very fair question, and I say fair because I have not only heard it before, but I can feel your, not sense of desperation, but I can feel the anxiety in your voice and how you're saying it. When I think about our state, my thinking comes along or feels the same way as how you were talking, because this is a horrendous situation that we are in. My best advice is always to teach the best you can, to explain it within the context of what you know is part of our tradition, so that they're not separated from that, and for them also at the same time to know exactly what you don't want them to become a part of. It's amazing to me how much respect children have for parents who sit down to mentally discipline them. Much more respect than they have for adults who brought them onto this planet, who just let anybody show them or teach them anything, and they have no political understanding of the world, no idea about how to be adults, no idea about who to look for other than you don't want this or you don't want that or these are all bad or blah, blah, blah. No, somebody who sits down and gives them an understanding of why I'm telling you this and why I need you to know this. And I know I'm not going to rule your life once you become grown, but you need to at least give this, give the experience that I have and my understanding on this planet, give it some serious consideration, because I love you. And I want you to be African, and I want you to be strong, and I don't want you to have pain in this world unnecessarily. I want you to know that I need you to be your ancestors. And this right now, under these conditions, if it was different, I might tell you something different. But under these conditions right now, we have to survive as a people until we get it right. And one of the ways that we have to survive is to make sure that we can take care of each other in family relationships without diluting the blood further and without taking on the sexual insanities of the people who are trying to destroy us. That's all you can do. They have to believe in you as their father. They have to believe in you as a parent who loves and cares them. And just like my daughter, everything that I instructed her to do, of course, she didn't do it in exactly the same way that I told her to or instructed her to or thought that she should. But she never, and she's 25 now, married, she has not left the path that we laid out for her. She hasn't, there's no question in her mind that she's African. There's no question in her mind that she's not supposed to deal with Europeans, especially at that level. There's no question in her mind that homosexuality is an extreme negative for African people. Now, there are a whole bunch of other little things, but on those big points, On those big points, she's clear. She's clear on African liberation. She's clear on our story. She's clear on history to the best that we could give it to her. And that, of course, is a measuring rod for a lot of parents who don't think that they're doing that great of a job or don't think that they're doing everything they can. There are things that when she was in the 3rd grade, I didn't know to tell her because I didn't know them. There are things now that I'll probably look back in 10 years and say, man, I should have told her or taught her about that because then that would help her understand, but I didn't know that. The question is, are we doing the best now with what we know? Are we uncompromisingly telling our children our truth? Children don't respect liars for parents. They respect truth tellers. They respect those of us who it didn't make a difference what was going to happen to us. We made sure that they knew. It didn't make a difference whether it made us unpopular or what have you. We needed for them to know. They'll respect that. And if they choose to ignore it, well, we can't do anything about it. As Patahotep was talking about, if you raise your child to think and do in the way that is good, and if they do as you have taught them, then you make sure that they have all the resources at your disposal and you prepare to pass on to them what you have. But if the child turns from you and acts like an alien, if you will, then you turn your back. You don't award that. You don't honor that. You dismiss that behavior, and if push comes to shove, you dismiss them. That's something that we don't think about. There's no. John Henry Clark always talked about accountability. There's almost no accountability in our community. We don't critique. We don't instruct. We don't guide each other. We are afraid to, and many of us don't want to, because in this particular cultural context where everybody is right and no one can tell anyone else what to do, we're afraid to do that. They have set us up in such a way that we are our own executioners by not giving ourselves guidance, by being afraid. So even the children can critique the adults. All I can say is you have to keep telling that truth. You have to be able to explain. You have to give them whatever it is that you think that they're capable of understanding at that time. And no matter what else, and you did say not to be a player, we have to make sure that the males and the females understand that polygamous relationships require a certain level of cultural maturity, a certain level of personal maturity to be able to handle it in such a way that it doesn't turn into a sexual free-for-all, which is what the West wants. Not only do they want it just in general for them, but they want it in us because that'll just be some way, another example of what they can point at and say, see, that doesn't work. You need to get on the individual sexual free-for-all ball game. You need to be a player because it doesn't make sense for you to have to be burdened with then the additional responsibilities of having to really take care of those children and to take care of those women or take care of those men if that was the situation. Because we need to take whatever options our ancestors left for us, given the conditions that we're in, so that we can get back to who we are and so that we can rear children who understand who we are and are willing to uncompromisingly fight for and build who we are. So I don't think it is a bad question or an irrelevant question or any of that. It's a very important question, and it's a question, a discussion that more quote-unquote conscious folks, parents, should be having with their children, so their children will at least have a base on which to think about what to do when they become adults, so that they don't end up mean, ugly, lonely people and unable to be useful to African liberation.
Let's see. Non-Mighty Wick, did you have a question for Dr. Baruti?
No, sir. Thank you, Dr. Baruti, for being on the show. Really appreciate the information. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Non-Mighty Wick is the person who informed me about your work. I was totally ignorant until he told me about homosexuality and the effeminization of African males. And please support the website, AkobenHouse.com. Make sure I get that out again. Akoben House, AKOBEN house.com. Person who called in, last four digits 2600. 2600. Your line is open.
Hi, Gus. This is Jeff Jones. And can I be heard? Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Hi, Dr. Baruti.
How you doing?
I'm good. It's good to have you on. It's very powerful and important information.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I guess I have a question. When we talk about the dire situation of Black families, I'm the youngest of 5, and I was born into a very chaotic family situation.
Okay.
Yeah, it's hard to talk about in public.
Okay.
But like I said, I'm the youngest of 5. I was born into a lot of chaos. There was a lot of, me and my brothers and sisters have different fathers. And I guess I'm getting older, and I know that a lot of the situation that I was born into affected me as far as finding a mate. Because I've never, I know a lot of people have a lot of examples of, healthy, well, maybe not Black people, but, you have at least one example of a healthy relationship. I don't have that. And so I guess my question is, as far as, and I'm a pretty healthy individual. I've made a lot of strides in my life, and I'm pretty productive, and I'm still, moving forward. I'm getting close to 40 though, and so and I'm single and I don't have any children. But my question is, as a single woman in my kind of situation, what would you recommend that I do to find a complement?
The first thing I always say in response to that is to do your work. Experience has taught me, and I've seen it in a lot of other people, that if you do the work that you are supposed to be doing, especially relative to the community, or in many cases I say exclusively relative to the community, what needs to be done relative to what you can do, then you should find whoever you're looking for there. There's a lot of logic to that, but if nothing else, when you're talking about staying power, when you're talking about finding a complement, then they ought to be doing the work that you're doing. That umbrella, people will ask Enia, we just celebrated 25 years, and they will say, well, how are you all able to stay together for so long? And the main answer has to do with the umbrella of fighting for African people. That was the priority, and that was the work that we were doing. At least we were thinking in those terms when we found each other, if you will, or we came across each other. And I think that is a vitally critical part of the equation that is missing. I will also, it's interesting to me, and I don't know if this is a law of nature or physics or human nature or what, but it seems that when people are looking, they never find when it comes to relationships. I've encountered that over and over again, but then when they're not looking, then what they need comes along. Like I said, I don't know if that's a law, but I've seen that many more times than I haven't seen that, and that seems to be part of the equation. Of course, at the same time, one of the lessons that I think that I successfully taught to our daughter, I said it enough to her, and in so many different ways, never settle. Never settle. Even though it may not sound nice, but I would prefer to be with and by myself for the next 40,000 years than to settle, because that means that it's less than what I should have or less than what I need. I don't know the nature of or the particulars, obviously, of the chaotic situation I have that you were raised in. And I have encountered a lot of people who grew up in a variety of different chaotic situations. And I know, I wasn't brought up in one, but I know I have seen, I have felt in other people's relationships and talking to them and them talking to me about what happened and folks trying to work stuff out, that has a major impact. And often it is in the, if I can say it this way, in the West, it's very important to keep people apart. It's very important for them not to be able to stay together. So the chaotic cultural and social situation that is created, an environment where chaos can reign, has made it so that people cannot attach themselves to other people in meaningful ways. It's a distancing process where it makes it very hard for you. I mean, I was talking to a brother last week, and the sister who he was talking to, he thought he had found his soulmate. He understands that concept relative to me, but he thought he had found his soulmate. And they were, very happy. And then something happened in her life at her job that was very reminiscent of the abuse that she had received from her mother growing up. And she created that shell. And that shell was for everybody, including him. And they moved further and further apart. And she just, this time I guess it was the worst of the times, because then she did things to herself which by the time he was able to really possibly say something of meaningful to her, she had made her transition. It was really bad in her situation. And I have encountered some horrendous stories. But we have to find ways, if we want to be able to, and the sad part is that it's not the fault of the person who's infected, but they have to live with it. But still, if they want to live good lives, they have to find ways, they have to look to see what it is that keeps them from, and I'm not saying that this is the case with you, but there's some variation of this, and I would say probably 95% of the horrendous child raising situations within our community. And the European community is normalized, so it's no big thing. That's their response. There is no emotional connect in the first place to any significant degree. So it's not a matter. For us, it's very important that we have that. We have to find out a way to break the cycle of that thought so that we can confine it to the source of that thought and not let it carry over into new people who we deal with, even though that also means that we have to be very, very careful with who we're dealing with to make sure that that's not there. Because often, as we go looking for certain things, and those certain things reflect the negatives of the past. But we have to make sure that we're clear on what our problem is as a result of what was done to us or said to us or what have you. Because nothing is done to you that doesn't have an impact, that doesn't have some effect on your life or your thinking. And we have to know as much as we can about what those things are and the extent to which they affect or effect how we do what we do and what we think. If we know that, just like if it's sort of like if you know what a problem is, then you of course then can apply an effective solution. So if we understand how these things emotionally, physically, spiritually affected us, then it gives us an upper hand in not allowing those things to continue to wreak havoc in our lives, especially when it comes to dealing with people. And it's also very important to the extent that we can. And, of course, that depends on the level of trust, which is another factor which Western society attempts to break between African people continuously. It's a factor of the trust that we have for whoever it is that we are with, or whoever we're choosing to be with. But that factor, that trust, we have to have trust to the extent that that person understands us, so that some of the things that we may say or do that aren't meant to be bad, that aren't meant to be hurtful, that aren't meant to be scary, that aren't meant to be distancing, are understood for what they are. And that person just doesn't respond in such a way of, man, this person's crazy. I don't understand this at all. I'm gone. And we have to be clear with people to the degree that we can. And as time goes on, of course, more gets revealed and more gets revealed and more gets revealed, and that's based upon the development of trust. But it's going to think the kind of relationships that we have to build as complementary pairs are relationships that take an enormous amount of time and energy, more than for any other people, because no people have gone through what we have gone through historically, and now no people are going through what we have been going through since our arrival here. And all of these horrendous acts and relationships and situations, I firmly believe they're cumulative. But the strength that we have allows us to deal with them in such a way that we can make these things work. But it's extremely hard work. I would suggest also, because one of the things that is working against us in a significant way in our community is that we become involved with someone and then we don't go to get assistance until a problem crops up. Whoever you may want to become involved with, and in fact, I would say even yourself now, need to find an elder, preferably an elder couple, who are conscious and committed to our community, who have a sense of urgency in the politics of what's going on with us, and who is willing to talk, willing to take the time on occasion to have conversations. And they can, in their wisdom, assess where this change may need to be hit, or where you may think about this in a particular way, or think about that in a particular way. But that needs to be done now, and it needs to be done early in a relationship. It needs to be done at the point where people are looking at each other as a possibility, so that discussion begins then, so it doesn't wait until there is so much water underneath the bridge that you can't cross it, you can't swim it. So talk to people who, and be very selective. Of course, I say elder, but I would prefer an elder couple. And it doesn't need to, I don't think that you need to have found somebody at this particular point in time before doing that, or at the point in time that you begin talking to them about that. Whatever the range of discussions may be. But it's easier to walk this road toward being a complementary pair with the assistance of folks who know that this is work and have a sympathetic and empathetic ear to what's going on and what has gone on in your life, because we're all healing. Some of us just have a lot more to heal than others.
The broadcast, this is all the time I have today for the program. Man, I'm just grateful to have the opportunity to share your insight with my listeners. Just a privilege to be able to have you on the program third time. Again, Dr. Mwalimu K. Baruti. Please check the website, akobenhouse.com. It is linked in the description for this program. Just click his name. It will take you to the website. And I have no no problem at all saying I intend to be greedy and looking for program number 4 so we can get him back to do Sex Imperative, if that's okay with you, Dr. Baruti.
I'm looking for the email.
We will be pestering you soon, sir. Thank you so much for sharing some of your evening with us. And number 4, look out. The email will be coming, sir. We will be in touch soon.
I appreciate it, and thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much, sir. Again, our guest, Dr. Mwalimu K. Baruti. Gus T Renegade is running. Got things to do on the plantation, but we'll be back tomorrow. So many people, and we can't talk today, but catch us tomorrow. Irritated Genie, Part 3. We'll be discussing Destruction of Black Civilization by Chancellor Williams. Context of White Supremacy. Thank you to all the investors who called in. And Ebony News Channel.blogspot.com. Please check the website again, ebonynewschannel.blogspot.com. We'll be back tomorrow. Irritated Genie, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Thank you.